Okay, so about 2 weeks ago, I took the driver's side front axle apart, Dana 44, to replace the leaking axle seal that's on the outside. And of course, about 2 weeks later, the passenger side is now leaking, of course. And that's the side that has, or that's right up against the diff on the inside, so you have to pull the diff out to change it, which means you have to take the whole driver's side back apart again. So now I have to completely strip down the whole front axle and install this seal, which is just great. All right, first thing is pop these covers off. There we go. So I want to put the front end up on jack stands and get the tires off, and then I'll come back. All right, now we're gonna pull the brakes off and the hubs apart. It only takes about, I don't know, probably 5 minutes to take all this apart. Last one. This should just pop off like such. Gotta grab a pair of snap ring pliers. There we go. Got the snap ring out. And there's one more outer one. And then gotta put a screw back in. I'll pull the locking hub out. Sometimes you need two. There you go. For that, you gotta take your spindle nut tool. One. And there's that locking ring that keeps them from coming undone. This part's always fun. I think this is my least favorite part. Putting this thing back on. Having to line those up. Because there's a little peg that goes through the holes you gotta line up. And there's one more spindle nut. Go. Now this will just pull off of here. Be careful not to throw your bearing out on yourself. That'll get grease everywhere. Wipe our hand off for a second here. All right. These are 9/16. It's done this. This is an 86 Dodge, and it has a Dana 44 with the front axle disconnect on the front, which is why this side's a little bit strange. Well, you'll see in a second. It doesn't have two inner seals like a regular Dana 44. There's one right out at the very edge because this side, or this axle, has 3 axle shafts. Alright. There are washers on here, but we'll get those later. Now we gotta move our brake caliper bracket. Gonna pivot it out of the way. We don't have to take it off though. It's cracked loose. Of course, these are fine threads, so it takes forever. I can pull out our axle shaft. There we go. Oh, gear oil, that's nice. What you want is to get gear oil on your brake pads. All right. There you go. There's that half shaft, whatever it's called. And now I'm actually going to drain the gear oil out of the center section, or out of the diff, so that this doesn't make a giant mess everywhere. And that way we get to smell gear oil for longer, which is what you want. All right, so I'm just gonna undo the diff cover and then come back when that's done. All right, so I was planning on getting all my bolts out of the oil pan there. Oh look, one made it out. But I went to pop this brake line off the cover, and the whole cover popped off. So we're just gonna let that drain for a bit. All right, we're just gonna use a drill press with a wire wheel. I'm gonna clean up this lip here for a new gasket. And when you're using a wire wheel, these gloves are usually enough to keep your hands from getting caught up by it. See? That's fine. It just skates off these. All right, now we're gonna take the other side apart. I'll just time lapse this side. It's the same as the other side. And you can see there, that's the seal we gotta replace. And you actually have to punch it out into the diff. And you can see about all the gear oil in there, it was leaking pretty good. So here we go. And this is the axle shaft that came out of there. You can see it's just a regular, has an inner seal that goes right around there. So it'll be fine. All right, and before we pull the diff out, we gotta move this tie rod out of the way because it'll keep the diff from coming out. All right, so here we go. And these can be difficult to get off sometimes. I don't think this one's going to be, but we'll see. Whatever. This shouldn't take much. I had this off recently to align it, so. I'm gonna grab a hammer. Out of the way. All right, now I got to pull the diff out. Those are probably 3/4 inch bolts. Let's find out. I've had it out before. I don't remember how big they are. Yeah, they're 3/4. So I'll get all these bolts out and then we'll pop the diff out. And when you pull these bearing caps off, you need to pay attention to how they go. Exactly how they come off is exactly how they need to go back on. And I believe the torque for these is 45 foot-pounds. All right, I remember. There's not a C-clip on this axle. There is a snap ring that holds on this axle shaft. So you don't have to touch the pin at all, basically, to get the diff out. You can see right there, there's the 2 ears. It's not that hard to get out. You take one screwdriver, and we're gonna pry on that there so that that side can't move. Or spin around as we try to push this side out. And we're gonna, there. And you can see we just popped it out there. And now this axle shaft should just be able to slide it out of the way like that. And now we gotta take the center axle disconnect housing off and pull this axle shaft out of the way the rest of the way. There's that snap ring. Don't lose this. All right. These are just some 7/16 bolts. And this is the vacuum actuator that couples the two axle shafts together when you put the truck in 4-wheel drive. And most Dana 44s don't have this. Instead, they have locking hubs on the front. This also has locking hubs on there, but it didn't originally have those. I put those on. It had full-time lockouts on it, so that all you had to do was shift the transfer case into 4, and then it would just go into 4-wheel drive because this couples it there. But because it had full-time lockouts, all of this was spinning all the time for no reason. And it kept burning out axle seals because the axle shafts were pitted, and they've since been sleeved, or the one has. The passenger side, the seal we're replacing, is still original, but it's still good. You can see here is that shift fork, and there is a cork gasket on here. I've never had to replace mine. It always just sticks to the housing. And then you can see inside, get a light here. See, there's the coupling ring that fork shifts, so we can pull that out of here. If I can get it. Oh, the axle shaft is in the way. Well, I'll just come back when we get these things out of here. All right, so I just got this slid over enough to be more than out of the way of getting the diff out. So we're gonna try to pop this out now. All right, so these can be really hard to get out because they're pretty tightly fit in there. Like, you can see this pry bar is not doing anything. So a trick you can do is take like a rag and just lay some of it on the teeth of the gear here and let it get pulled into the pinion. And then I'll go back and I'll put a pipe wrench on the yoke, and then we'll spin that, and that should pop this out. So I'm actually just gonna leave it running. Let's see. That's the wrong way, of course. That should pop this out of here. I can't see what it's doing. You should be able to. All right, seems like we got through that. And it doesn't look like it moved at all, either, surprisingly. You may have to fold the rag up some more. Get some more thickness going through it. Ooh, that sliced this thing up. All right. See. All right, that definitely pushed it out. All right. So now we should be able to pop it out. I'll get a longer pry bar. Just gonna stand on it, and you're not gonna hurt the diff if it falls out on cardboard. It's gonna be okay. All right. All right, here we go. I might not look like it, but I just pried really hard right there. So this thing's getting pretty stuck in there. I have no plans to catch this, by the way. Try it now. Nope. can catch it, I will try. I don't have very high expectations. That's not a good idea. I'm having a hard time getting the passenger side of this rod as much as the driver's side. All right, well, you definitely didn't see that since the camera was flying through the air, but we got the diff out. And you're also gonna wanna make sure that you keep track of these races. Make sure they keep them on the same bearings. So now, we can punch this seal out, just right in there. Just the whole reason we're doing any of this, and then we can put the new one in. All right, there's that seal in there. And you have to pop it out from that way. And you can just use like a broom handle or something long and just punch it out. And if you're wondering why the seal is bad after only like 3.5 years, that's because it's eaten a lot of sand, like a lot of sand. All right, I'm gonna pop it out now. And there it goes. All right, and you can see here. Now I spent a lot of time with a shop vac cleaning out that axle tube before when I've had that side apart to like grease the ball joints or just do whatever. And see, it actually doesn't look too bad on the inside, but you can see all the grit that's in there. And there's our new seal. It's the same as the old one, part number 5131. It's a national oil seal, and they come with a 3-year warranty. I was out of that, so I had to buy a new one, but they're only like $5. All right, I've already wiped some out, but I'm gonna clean this out as best I can, and then I'll get back to you. So to press the seal into the housing, obviously it needs to get pressed in like that. And you need something on the back side that is small enough to fit in the diff and big enough to where it's not gonna screw up the seal. Or if you can find something that perfectly fits inside of it, like a large socket, like this one, like you can see, that fits in the seal and it won't screw it up. What I did before was you can just like trace this seal with on a 2x4, and then you can just cut out a circle and then use that as something to hit on instead of hitting the seal, because if you just try to tap the seal in, you're just gonna mess it up and it'll leak. All right, now we're gonna get this axle shaft and this ring all the way out. That way we can put we're gonna use actually a broom handle to go all the way through this axle tube to the diff and we're gonna hit the broom handle with a hammer to punch this seal in. All right, and there's the 2 axle shafts out for the driver's side of the truck. You can see here's the ring that couples them together, and there is actually a bearing in here that this pilots around on. So yeah, there's that center axle disconnect. That's the way it is. Here's that driver's side axle shaft. You can see that it's been sleeved there. A seal rides here and a bearing rides right here. This is a SKF sleeve. It was about $33. The part number is 99196. And basically this truck sat forever, and this seal surface got all pitted up. And so it would just keep chewing the seals up. So you put a new one in and it'd last for like 3-4 months, and it would just start leaking again because it was getting all chewed up by the pitting and the shaft here. I put this sleeve on it and that's fixed it for me. So if you have that problem, well, there you go. All right, we're gonna start punching this seal in. Take our socket here. But first, we're gonna get this just kind of set in place by hand. Whoop. That might happen a couple of times. Just make sure it's clean before you install it. All right. Try to be careful with these because you don't want to screw them up. Well, that's going in way crooked. So we're gonna pop that out and fix it if we can. Yeah, I have to go around and pop that out. Carefully, very carefully. You can see it's fine. That didn't misshape it at all. It's really hard to get these started straight. Wouldn't be surprised if I have to do that again. Let's see. All right. Try again. Actually, not even need to use the broomstick. Seems like it's going in just fine. All right. Ho hum, ho hum. Let's see. I'm gonna use my camera here and see, make sure that got in evenly all around the edges. All right, so there you go. Our seal is installed. All right, now we're gonna use a wire wheel on a drill to clean up all the sealing surfaces. And of course, the whole reason we took the inner shaft all the way out was that if we had to, we could just use this broomstick all the way through the axle housing. But I was able to just tap it inside the diff housing. So the first time I did this, I didn't have enough room inside the diff housing to get a good swing, or enough of a swing to knock the seal in. So I actually had two people. I was in there managing the seal, making sure it was going in straight. And then I had a friend out here lightly tapping this broomstick to slowly press it in. So now we could put our diff back in, but instead what we're gonna do is get the passenger side axle shaft back in and resting inside of this seal, the very end of it, so that it doesn't interfere with putting our diff back in. But once we do get the diff pushed all the way back in there, we'll be able to just pop the axle shaft in the rest of the way. That way, we don't have to worry about dragging it along the bottom of this axle tube and getting dirt on the seal or in the seal before it's run for the first time, because obviously we don't want that. That's probably why we had to replace it to begin with. And yeah. All right, you can see we got that axle shaft sitting in the seal there where it's not gonna interfere with anything. And now I'm gonna start putting the diff back in. Actually, first, I'm gonna wipe some of the scootch off the teeth from that towel earlier. All right, that looks good. Oh, this is gonna be really difficult. How the hell did I do this before? Oh, there we go. All right. I'm gonna speed that up in post. All right. Now we got our bead-filled mallet, or whatever it's filled with. We're not yet lined up with a pinion. It's up a ways to go. Alright, now we're lined up with the pinion. Whoa. Nope. I refuse to bleed the brakes. Absolutely not. I'm gonna grab a piece of wood now. I can hit that with a little bit more force. Alright, that's probably as far as we're gonna get that in with the hammers. Now I'm gonna use those bearing caps to pull it in the rest of the way after I just clean some of this junk out of here. All right, there you can see we've got the diff back in now that we've had that axle shaft resting in the seal there. We're gonna get that popped in, so I'm gonna go do that. And you can see how easy that made that. And now we don't have to worry about that axle shaft having any dirt on it when we install it in our brand new seal. All right, so there's a trick to getting this axle shaft back installed there. Because it's so short, it only goes from there to right, it ends right around there. You'll never be able to pick it up enough for it to be able to slide in there. It wants to fall down, and then it's just gonna hit up against the spider gear it's supposed to go in on this side. So what you have to do is you have to install that axle shaft onto the end of the other one, and then you have to use that axle shaft to push down on to pop this end up. So you have to push from this end, and you might have to keep spinning it through there and trying until you get it in there. So I'll video this. All right, so here we go. We're gonna install this in here. And I should be able to lift up with the help of this axle shaft. Oh, we got some engagement in the diff. Getting somewhere. I think we're hitting the studs for the lift block on the steering. Actually, wipe that off of there. And there we go. That's installed in the diff. Now you need to do it that way because there's no way you'll ever be able to lift that axle shaft up enough to get it installed. I'll take you around a diff side. And there you can see is the axle shaft waiting to receive the C-clip. And there you can see I've got the C-clip back on. Right there. And now I'm gonna put this housing back on. And then we can start putting the hubs back together and we'll be done. All right, so now we gotta pop that other axle shaft back out enough to get this ring back in there. So let's see if we can just do it. Nah, it's gonna need some pulling out there. So I'll just come back once that's done. There you go, there's that sleeve in there. And when this truck isn't shifted in two-wheel drive or too high, the fork goes over like this. So just make sure you get that lined up. Whoop. There's my gasket. And I gotta make sure, there we go, I got it. And I just gotta bolt that back down. All right, so that's all back on. Now I'm just gonna time lapse putting the hubs back together. Oh, and the torque spec for the spindle nuts for the wheel bearings is 50 foot-pounds, and then you back it off 90 degrees. And then you line up the peg on the spindle nut with the lock ring to the nearest hole tighter. All right, we got both sides back together here, and now we gotta put our diff cover back on. I left the drag link out of the way just to have a little bit more room, make this thing a little easier. So now you can use a paper gasket for that. That's what I had on there. I have this, so I'm just gonna use this. All right, I just used those longer bolts to get things lined up, and then I got two regular bolts, and now I need to get all the ones out of there and dry it off, and then I'll put them in. All right, so that's all on, torqued down good enough. And this stuff doesn't require any dry time. You can see it's called 1 minute gasket. One of these cans is like, I think it was 18 bucks at Farm and Fleet, but it's super convenient. So that stuff's pretty mint. But now we just have to fill it up with fluid and put this drag link back on, wheels and tires, and we're done. All right, I got this full of fluid now. It took 2 quarts of oil, and this one is down to here. And I emptied the other 2 bottles back into this one while I couldn't get out because of the angle. So that's 2 of those plus this much is however much it takes. All right, now we're gonna get that drag link nut back on. One thing I left out was that these trucks should have a brake rotor dust shield on them. They go behind the spindle, so there's like the knuckle. It goes right up against that, and then you put your spindle on, and the washers and the nuts and yada yada yada. I found that these are basically just really, really good at making sure that all the mud and dirt that gets caked in there stays in there and makes it even harder to get out. So I just left mine off, and you can see the rotor right there. It just makes it really easy to clean, lets the rotors breathe.